All right, let's get some perspective now on what Premier Panyaza Lesufi needs to address as his key priorities. We're joined by Dr. Kagiso Pooe. He is the senior lecturer at the Wits School of Governance. Dr. Pooe, thank you very much for your time. Let's deal first with the situation that holds right now. About 7 provinces are on a state of disaster because of the floods that are continuing to give us rain. But for people of Merafong, for example, I watched last night with utter despair, the people of Gauteng, that area, we're told it is dolomitic, but add to that the stormwater drainage system, which is just completely lacking in the area. Aren't those the basics that Bongane Baloyi is speaking about when he says Panyaza Lesufi should perhaps stay away from making grand plans and instead deal with the basics, get those right first?
Yeah, morning. Thanks for having me, Mr. Pooe. Yes, I think, look, that is actually a very good point. And it seems to echo what happened at Sona, which is less promises and actually just do what you're supposed to do. On that, I'd also probably just add what's happening in my hometown of Vaal as well, where a lot of these things, look, I understand that there's global warming and there are things which, people did not necessarily foresee it to this level. But as you added, the issue of bulk infrastructure has always been an issue in Gauteng. And if you actually travel around Gauteng, you probably see that the issue of infrastructure degradation has become quite the massive thing. And this is where, look, if Mr. Panyaza Lesufi is serious about really turning the fortunes of Gauteng around, this is what he needs to invest. He needs to ask the question, what has been happening for the last 10 years or so, I'd say longer, that the ANC has been in charge, and why is it that we've seen the degradation of infrastructure, where basically what we're having now is just highlighting how bad the infrastructure development of the Gauteng province is.
There are many issues on the Premier's radar, I would think, and key among them, given the week from which we come, where crime was a major talking point. He was addressing on Saturday at an e-policing symposium, if you like, and that's where they were dealing with issues of, fighting crime. And I think part of it was to inspect the helicopters that are going to be part of this arsenal in fighting crime. Do you think that technology, perhaps, he is on the right path when he is looking into technology in order to help fight crime?
Look, I always say this, technology is an enabler of what is supposed to be a firm foundation. Now, you can have all the gadgets you want, you can have all the software you want, but if you don't have the proper manpower, if you don't have the proper planning, and I think Mr. Bongani, the former mayor of Midvaal, touched on it, which is to say, look, it's a competency of national government, so there's also a question, which I think the Western Cape has also been asking about, whether there should be a deregulation of it. Whether it is or it's not the case, I don't firmly want to touch on it, but the key question, which what is the state of manpower in many of the areas? And when you speak to community members, they speak about things like when you make a phone call to the police, the amount of time it takes for them to get there, the manner in which they take statements takes forever, dockets going missing. So in as much as I'm an advocate, and here we're advocates of technology, I always say this, technology works well when the foundations are in the correct place. And I think when it comes to Gauteng, and I think government sometimes seems to be blindsided by the fanciness of technology, they don't work on the foundations. And hence, while I'm agreeing that technology is good, I would rather he focus on the foundations and the primary things that make law enforcement work in any province. And I think that's missing in Gauteng. It's not only me who's saying this. If you listen to other experts, they'll tell you what's wrong with just the manpower, just basically the approach of policing in South Africa in general.
Yeah. On energy, we are currently on stage 6 of load shedding, and we're told perhaps it's possible that there may be further breakdowns, or at least an improvement will be announced if and when that happens. Gauteng, on the other hand, last week they had what is called an energy expo. And again, that's where they were exploring what is it that Gauteng can do independent of Eskom. Someone suggested that the Western Cape is leapfrogging Gauteng, and yet we are the city that glitters. We are a province of gold. Do you think that we are lagging behind the Western Cape in terms of our planning for the energy situation?
Look, I like the manner in which you raise the question. It's an issue of planning. So sometimes, look, the Western Cape has done fairly well, but if you notice where most businesses are still in Gauteng. So the key question I like with the way you center out it is the issue of planning. And if the question is centrally about planning, not so much where businesses are moving, you're quite correct. And again, there's no need to have an energy summit or an expo. The question should be, listen, go speak to the Western Cape, find out how is it that they are at the level they are where they're saying, listen, we have spoken to private businesses. We are looking at models that allow us to take, private individually produced energy into the grid to assist us. So yes, planning is far ahead than Gauteng, which should not be the case, because this was, and I use the word was because sometimes I think Gauteng has fallen behind on this, not just because of the Western Cape, but because if you look at what businesses are doing in going to the places like East Africa, Kenya, and Nairobi, for example. So we were the epicenter, but planning has fallen behind, much like the political planning capacity of the government of the ANC has fallen behind. So really, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's quite simple. Check what the West has been doing, retrofit it so that it actually meets the needs of Gauteng, because Gauteng would be quite different from the Western Cape. We should always be cognizant of the fact that you can't cut and paste policy. You need to understand what is the context of Gauteng. And look, also speak to the private sector. I don't think the private sector in Gauteng is talked often with, to actually say, listen guys, what are you thinking? Where can we collaborate with? And I think that could be the big advantage for Gauteng, where we can collaborate with the private sector, which if you look at places like Santin and the JC listed companies, most of them are there. And I don't think enough of them are actually being consulted to say, how do you make Gauteng actually become the epicenter of the economy once again?
Yeah. Healthcare in Gauteng, the issues are well documented there. Corruption has been at an all-time high, and that's part of the reason why people like Babita Deokaran are a constant reference, because that's a whistleblower who we're going to talk about in this country for a very long time, because those are the people that have been failed by this government. What does it do to deal with corruption in the health sector?
Look, I think there's been many report needs to be done. But number one should not be that we are talking more about it or he speaks about it. I think South Africans as citizens are tired of having to listen to fact-finding missions, commissions of inquiry. Everybody seems to know what the problem is except the people that need to take the action. So I think what we should not be hearing tonight is I am thinking I will be establishing a commission, I'll be establishing a fact-finding mission. The issue should be, have you spoken to law enforcement? What are the cases and how far are they with it? And when are we going to see people actually getting, either go to court, because we understand that there's a presumption of innocence, which is I always find a bit of an odd thing, but I accept it as it is. But we want to see people actually going to court and actually seeing these things becoming rolling. But there's another thing which I think we're actually quite missing, and this is where the province does need to have some level of culpability, which is the manner in which it has handled its staffing. Here I'm speaking about nurses and doctors. If you speak to most health professionals in Gauteng, they'll tell you that, look, the province is at a shocking level in terms of just infrastructure and also how they handle patients. Sometimes doctors have to work where they actually don't have the equipment which is needed to actually make healthcare work. So I think it's just about doing the basics right, which is to say when your supply chain says, listen, how does supply chain systems work? How do you know that, levels of gloves or medicine is at the level that you need? You don't really need geniuses to do this. This is supposed to be a simple administrative function, and I think that's what it should be focused on, which is to say, why have we fallen behind? Who's in charge? Who's not writing up the right numbers? And sometimes they kind of make this more complicated than it ought to be.
Yeah. 2 quick questions before we end our conversation. Job creation. That perhaps should be one of his biggest headaches. We are a youthful province. There are 16 million of us who live in Gauteng. Unemployment was at 29.5% in 2016. Today, it sits at 34%. Employment opportunities for young people. Where are we?
Truth be told, I think we're nowhere. And not because of, look, there might have been some initiatives here and there, but I don't think there is an actual space for economic development for the province. And this stems from the fact that, I'm sure you've heard me say this 1,000 times, the South African government as a whole, there is no economic development plan for South Africa. The NDP is not an economic policy. It's a vision without actual outputs. So the question that we really, we need to actually put to him is to say, listen, you're not going to do anything in less than a year. And I think we need to probably put that off the table. This idea that politicians create employment is a mistake. what he needs to be doing is to actually go to the private sector and say, listen, guys, what is it that Gauteng as an economic hub, once as an economic hub of the country, needs to do to actually get you guys to invest in infrastructure? And it actually needs to be targeted. Yeah, I mean, you can't overly always invest in Joburg and Pretoria. We need to see investment in places like, I'll say in the Vaal. We need to see places in northern Pretoria and the like. But it cannot always be the same places. And also there needs to be a level of trust which says, listen, when the private sector puts in money, they can actually see an account, an actual political accountability for it. Because sometimes the private sector gets accused of not putting in money, but they'll tell you, of not putting in money. But they'll tell you this, and how can I put money into a government that is just failing to account for simple, basic things? So I think there needs to be almost a come-together moment, and this has to include opposition parties, because the idea that the ANC as the leading government is the only one that's going to fix Gauteng, I think that idea has long sailed, that boat has long sailed. And it needs to be simply, how do Gauteng political parties, whether you like the ANC or not, come together and say, listen, where should we be investing? How can we get a bang for a buck? And sometimes we also need to look at very controversial things like saying, if you want to attract foreign direct investment, what legislations do we need to repeal to actually make Gauteng the number one place where people want to invest?
Yeah.
And this might be an issue of offending certain partners so that we can actually get traction and actually move forward.
Final question to you, sir. Panyaza Lesufi will deliver his first State of the Province address since taking over as Premier less than 6 months ago. Does he obsess with trying to set himself apart from his predecessor, David Makhura? Keep in mind that this is a person who has been part of this administration, various portfolios, but I think in the main, education is where he has been for the longest time. Does he obsess with trying to set himself apart from David Makhura? Because, again, people are going to say, it's one administration. It's the ANC administration. Just get on with it.
I think he shouldn't. Let me just start there. He shouldn't, because this is one political party. So it shouldn't really matter, because I think they believe in the issue of what is called collective accountability. What he should be focusing on is to say, listen, this is where we've done wrong, and we're going to pick one or two, three things which we know we can actually accomplish in the year leading up to the elections. Keep it simple. Give full accountability of where you've not done right. And I think that's what citizens want to hear, because everything related to who Mr. Lesufi is, as you've said, people see him as an ANC person. People are blaming the ANC for where the province is. So he should just really keep to that, not try to do anything or separate himself from the political party which he comes from.
Dr. Kagiso Pooe is a senior lecturer at the Wits School of Governance. Thank you very much for that insightful conversation. All right.